There was a version of you that used to exist. Not a younger version, not a more naive version, not the version that had not yet been through everything you have been through. A fuller version. One that had opinions they said out loud without measuring the room first. One that had needs they expressed without immediately apologizing for having them. One that took up space, not aggressively, not selfishly, just naturally. The way a person takes up space when they have not yet been taught that their presence is something that requires justification. You remember that version. Not clearly, not in detail, but in the way you remember something you lost so gradually that you cannot pinpoint the exact moment it was gone. Only that one day you looked up and it was not there anymore. Stay with me. Because what Carl Jung discovered about what happens to an empath who slowly disappears inside their own life, without anyone noticing, without any single dramatic moment to point to, will permanently change how you understand where you went. And by the end of this, you will have something that version of you has been waiting a very long time to receive. A way back. Carl Jung said that the self does not disappear all at once. It does not leave in a moment of crisis or collapse dramatically under the weight of everything an empath carries. It leaves the way the tide leaves. Quietly, gradually, so slowly that the shoreline looks almost the same from one day to the next. Until one morning you wake up, and the water is gone and you are standing on sand that used to be covered, and you cannot remember the last time you felt like the ocean was yours. You see, most people think empaths lose themselves because they give too much. But Jung's research revealed something far deeper, and frankly far more precise than that. Here is what nobody tells empaths about the disappearance, and trust me, once you understand this, you will never again wonder why you feel like a stranger inside your own life. According to Carl Jung, every empath carries within them what he called the gravitational pull of other people's needs, a force so constant and so natural to them that they stopped feeling it as a pull a long time ago. It simply became the direction they moved in, toward whoever needed them, toward whatever required their attention, toward every room that needed holding together, and every person that needed steadying, and every situation that would have been worse without their invisible presence managing it from the inside. And while they were moving in that direction, while all of that outward movement was happening, something else was occurring beneath the surface. The inward movement stopped. Not permanently, not irreversibly, but slowly, incrementally, decision by decision and compromise by compromise, and one more time they put themselves last, because this was not the right moment to need anything. Jung called this the neglect of the interior life, the gradual abandonment of the empath's own inner world, their desires, their boundaries, their sense of what they actually want from the life they are living, as a direct consequence of the constant redirection of their attention outward. And here is the critical piece most people miss entirely. The empath does not notice it happening, because it never feels like loss in the moment. It feels like love. But here is where it gets dangerous for empaths specifically. And this is where Jung's work becomes absolutely essential. Carl Jung discovered that the disappearance does not announce itself. It disguises itself as every virtue the empath has ever been praised for. The accommodation that looks like flexibility, the silence that looks like patience, the needs they swallow that look like maturity, the version of themselves they edit before entering a room that looks like social awareness. Each one by itself is nothing. A small adjustment, a reasonable compromise, the kind of thing every adult does in the course of a functioning life. But Jung identified what happens when those small adjustments become the permanent architecture of how an empath moves through the world. He called it the chronic contraction of the authentic self, the process by which an empath does not make one large sacrifice of who they are, but 10,000 small ones, each one invisible, each one justifiable, each one feeling in the moment like the right thing to do, until the self that remains is a significantly reduced version of the one that started. Quieter, more careful, more aware of what it costs to be fully themselves than they are of what it costs not to be. And that cost, the one they stopped counting because it became the water they swim in, is the highest price an empath ever pays. Listen carefully to what happens next, because this is where everything shifts. There comes a moment, and if you are an empath reading this, you already know the moment I am describing, even if you have never had a name for it. There comes a moment when the disappearance becomes visible. Not to anyone else, only to you. It usually happens in a quiet, completely ordinary moment. Not in the middle of a crisis. Not during a confrontation. Not when everything falls apart. It happens when everything is fine. You're in a conversation with someone you care about, and they ask you a simple question. What do you want? What are you feeling? What would make you happy? And you open your mouth to answer, and nothing comes. Not because you are sad. Not because you are overwhelmed. Not because the question caught you off guard. But because somewhere along the way you stopped asking yourself those questions so completely that the answers genuinely are not there anymore. Jung called this the moment of interior silence. The point at which the empath reaches for themselves and finds not emptiness exactly, but an absence they cannot immediately explain, like reaching for something you were certain you left on the table, and finding only the space where it used to be. But here is the part that will absolutely change your life, because Jung did not just document the disappearance. He discovered exactly what causes it to accelerate, and the answer is not other people's needs, not the relationships that took too much, not the environments that required them to shrink, not the circumstances that kept them perpetually in service of everyone except themselves. Those things are real. Those things contributed. But Jung identified the actual engine beneath all of it. He called it the empath's unconscious agreement. The deeply embedded belief, formed so early and so quietly, that most empaths cannot trace it back to a single source, that their value in any relationship is contingent on their usefulness, that they are loved for what they do and not for what they are, that the moment they stop being the one who gives, the one who holds, the one who shows up and adjusts and accommodates, and makes things easier for everyone around them, the moment they simply exist without performing any of those functions, they will no longer be worth keeping, and so they keep giving, keep adjusting, keep making themselves smaller and quieter and more manageable, not because anyone is asking them to anymore, because they internalized the asking so long ago that they are now the ones doing it to themselves. Jung said that this specific invisible self-perpetuating agreement is the mechanism that drives the disappearance from the inside, not the world taking from them giving themselves away before the world can decide they are not worth having. Here is what nobody tells you about the empath who has been disappearing. They do not feel like they are disappearing. They feel like they are coping. They feel like they are being responsible, like they are being mature, like they are doing what adults do, is managing their needs, prioritizing the people they love, functioning in the world without demanding that the world stop and accommodate everything they feel. They have reframed the disappearance as discipline. They have called the contraction growth. They have named the silence wisdom. And Jung said that this reframing, this specific psychological maneuver by which the empath transforms their own erasure into something that sounds like virtue, is one of the most sophisticated defense mechanisms the human psyche ever produces, because it makes the wound invisible even to the person carrying it. You cannot grieve what you have convinced yourself you voluntarily released. You cannot reclaim what you have told yourself you wisely set aside. You cannot begin the return until you are willing to call the departure by its actual name. So what is the actual name? Jung was direct about this in a way that very few people in his field were willing to be. He said the disappearance of the empath is not a natural consequence of loving deeply. It is a symptom of believing that loving deeply requires disappearing. And that belief, however long you have been carrying it, however deeply it has become embedded in the way you exist in relationships, is not the truth. It is a story that was handed to you by environments and relationships and early experiences that could not accommodate the full weight of what you are. And stories, no matter how convincing they have become, can be rewritten. But here is the final piece, and it is the most important thing Carl Jung ever said about the empath who woke up one day and realized they were gone. He said that the return is not about finding who you used to be. That version is not waiting somewhere in the past for you to come back and collect it. The return is about building, consciously, deliberately, for the first time with full awareness of what you are doing, the self that the disappearance interrupted. Not the self before the giving, not the self before the relationships that asked too much, not the self before the world taught you that your needs were negotiable and everyone else's were not. A new self. One that has all the depth and sensitivity and extraordinary capacity for connection that made you an empath in the first place. but also something that version never had. The absolute unshakable knowledge that those gifts do not require self-erasure to be offered. That you can love without disappearing, that you can give without evaporating, that you can be fully present for the people who matter, without being absent from yourself. Jung called this the reclamation of the sovereign self. The moment an empath stops operating from the unconscious agreement that their value is conditional and starts operating from the truth that their presence, their full, unedited, uncontracted, completely themselves presence, is not something anyone ever had the right to ask them to minimize. And that reclamation, quiet, internal, requiring nothing from anyone who contributed to the disappearance, is available to you right now. Not after you figure out how to want less. Not after you work through every relationship that asked too much. Not after everything in your external life rearranges itself into something that finally feels safe enough for you to fully exist inside. Right now, in the exact version of yourself that looked up recently and noticed the water was gone. That noticing, that specific moment of interior recognition is not the problem. It is the beginning of the return, and the self that has been waiting on the other side of it has been there the entire time. Not lost, not gone, just covered by years of choosing everyone else so completely that you forgot choosing yourself was ever an option. It always was. It still is. If something in this reached the part of you that has been quietly wondering where you went, that wondering is not weakness. It is the most honest thing you have felt in a long time. And honest is always where the return begins. Share this with the empath in your life who has been slowly disappearing behind their own, giving without anyone noticing. It was happening. They need to hear that what they lost was never gone. It was waiting for them to stop long enough to find it again. And subscribe, because what is coming next is for the empath who is ready to stop disappearing and start arriving us fully finally, completely back to themselves.